What's up, YouTube? The dark side of life here. And today, our topic is going to be about inner thoughts. Now, before I get into this topic, I do want to bring something up from my last video. In one of my last videos, I talked about suicide, and just like I said in the video, a big issue is that people want to pretend the words isn't there. Interestingly enough, after I put that video on, it's really obvious that nobody watched the video on YouTube. They just saw it. A bot saw it and automatically sent a message, which is really kind of sad, right? Because if anyone actually watched the video, they would have seen that I actually, went into details about what people can expect and how people can pick up on it. I never actually went into how I wanted to hurt myself, but it's pretty sad that the YouTube algorithm immediately saw that and just emailed my account I use for it. Are you okay? Blah, blah, blah. You didn't watch the video. I don't mind if they put the crisis hotline on there. I think that's important, but one thing that's kind of annoying is that it's talks as, the way it introduced it is if I'm actually producing gratuitous content, and when you go to watch the video, it actually has a big old warning about how it's not appropriate, but realistically, it was all educational, and no part of it was actually ever talking about how to properly, it's very important, how to properly do the act, because I did not want to give anyone any way to know how to do the act. I don't think that that would be beneficial at all. But just like I said before, you can do what everyone does and pretty much just, the magic word, we better do something, right? This is kind of a big issue, but that's a different video. Today, I want to talk about inner thoughts. And the reason I want to talk about inner thoughts, and this is going to be this is probably going to shock those of you who don't actually have this yourself. But for those of you who actually have these, this might be a bit of a relief, because one of the biggest issues when you have thoughts, and we'll get more detail what the thoughts are, is that you can sometimes feel that you're the only person who has that, and nobody else has it. So how can anyone else understand how you feel? And so I think it's really important that people understand who are suffering from this, that they're not the only person suffering from this. It's actually quite, there are other people that deal with it, but it's very important to understand how to deal with it. So before we go to that topic, we're going to talk about something important, which is serial killers. Now here's something I do find funny, by the way. I made a video on suicide, and it's literally, this video is not appropriate, blah, 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 blah. But if you watch a video on serial killers or mass murderers, it doesn't give you that warning. It's kind of sad nowadays that suicide has become, for some reason, worse than mass murder. But that's one different typical note. A different note. So let's think about our inner thoughts. Now, before again, let's talk about serial killers. A lot of people think, and I think it's a common misunderstanding, that if somebody has dark thoughts, they're going to act on it. If somebody has done something cruel, they had no control because they were psycho or insane or crazy. And I think that's really important to go over what this is, right? You do not just wake up a psychopath. And I'm going to use the word psychopath because pretty much all serial killers, if not all serial killers, are psychopaths, right? They don't have a conscience for what they do. They usually get pleasure out of it. But something to understand, and this is kind of can be a concern, if you ever find yourself having certain thoughts that are connected to this, you might worry that you're going to be a psychopath or a sociopath. Now, to be clear, a psychopath is way more dangerous than a sociopath. A sociopath is manipulative, can be controlling, but they're not usually going to go on a murder spree, right? That is usually reserved for your psychopaths. Because a sociopath, believe it or not, still has a conscience and still feels guilty for things they do. So they would not normally act on something so gratuitous, so horribly, right? So how does one become a psychopath? This is the big question. Now, it is true that certain events can cause someone to become a psychopath. However, it's also very important to understand that those events are not common and are not something that you would know for a fact if you dealt with it, right? However, what usually comes into what makes a psychopath is indulgence. So, what does that mean? They get some thoughts in their head that, can be honest, do release some form of endorphin that makes it a good feeling. They know it's something that they shouldn't enjoy, but they do. So what do? They think about it. They dwell on it. And that is the beginning, right? Eventually thinking about it, dwelling on it, leads to getting sexual pleasure out of it, to fantasizing about it, to planning it, to finally doing it. It's very important to understand those steps, because if you understand the steps and what leads you to walking on that path of becoming a psychopath, you can actually actively make steps to avoid it. So let's break down each step, right? Now, if you suffer from thoughts of, I'm going to say these words, pedophilia, rape, murder, cannibalism, torture, drinking blood, violence, things that you know are not okay, things you know are bad, things you know you shouldn't think about. And I'm gonna be honest, if they bring you pleasure to think about it, it's really out of your control. It happens to me, right? I'll have dreams, and I'll wake up and I'm like, what the fuck was that dream? What the fuck did I dream, right? Now, I have no control over my dreams, right? Nobody has control over their dreams. And I think that's the first thing that you have to learn when you suffer from this, is that you don't have control what your brain does on autopilot, right? That is not control. If you try to control what your brain does on autopilot, you're going to exhaust yourself out and you're going to lose the fight. You're fighting the wrong thing. These happen. I will be honest with myself. I've had thoughts of pretty much all of those things. But and they have actually brought me, they do bring some form of sexual pleasure, right? But that is when you make a decision, right? And you decide, are you going to think about these? Or are you going to just move past them, focus on something else? Now, believe it or not, you're not lost if you think about them. The problem is, the further down you go, the harder it is to pull out. So if you decide that you're going to actually dwell on these thoughts, whether it's because it's messed up and it concerns you, or because it kind of interested you, either way it doesn't really matter. If you dwell on these thoughts, what they end up doing is they start to implant more inside of you. And you slowly will find yourself, you'll make yourself, honestly, it's very common to make the excuse of, why would I think like that? And trying to figure out why you think like that, but the reality of it is that you enjoy it, and that's why you're really dwelling on it. Now, the next step after you start dwelling on it is to start fantasizing about it, which usually is going to lead to self-pleasure, where you are probably going to get yourself off thinking about it. You're probably going to pick again, psychopaths tend to pick their first victim is, somebody close to them, somebody that they've been seeing. You're probably going to pick somebody that fits this category that you've been seeing. And again, it has to do with nothing to do with hatred or anger. It literally is just for those of you who don't actually ever have this happen, it's pretty much the same thing as watching a porn or imagining a nice blonde with, really good chest giving you a blowjob. Or if you're a girl, fantasizing about Orlando Bloom or Johnny Depp or some other actor that's absolutely, just a hunk of a man, right? I don't really consider Orlando Bloom a hunk of a man, but women seem to like him more than men do. But that's you fantasize about that. And for you guys, that's honestly, there's really nothing dangerous about that. Right? The problem with when you suffer from a mental illness that actually has this is a side effect of it, right? Not all mental illnesses have this, but if you have a specific mental illness where this is a side effect, where these disgusting, dangerous thoughts hit your head, it is dangerous to dwell on them. And there's also another thing to really remember when you're going through this, and that is that unlike a normal person who is simply a normal person who might, indulge in their fantasies a bit, they're able to tell fantasy from fiction. So a perfectly healthy girl who may fantasize about Hugh Jackman, having a good time with him, she knows it's fantasy. She knows it will never be real, right? That wall is very solid. Same thing goes with a guy who has no, their chemicals are, all cylinders are firing perfectly fine, that fantasy reality wall is very solid. However, for those of us who don't, those of us who, if you're already having these thoughts, one thing you have to remember, and this is actually advice I got from my psychiatrist, is this. What the problem is when you break that wall. The minute you let a crack into that wall's gonna break. Our wall between reality and fantasy is very thin, and because of this, it's very important to not get close to that wall. You want to stay as far from that wall as possible. The best way, again, is to, if you start to have these thoughts that you know are disgusting, you know are wrong, the best way is to just focus your attention elsewhere. You know, don't try to sit there and be like, oh man, don't try to fight it. All of those are just going to lead you to thinking about it. Just, god damn, that was fucked up. If you have somebody close, talk about it. Honestly, talking about it is one of the best things to get out of your mouth. I don't know why this is disgusting. Why did this happen, right? Get it out, and then move on in your life. Now, does that mean you're going to forget these? No, but what happens is you actually remove the drive to dwell on it, right? It's still there. Like, I still have mine, but I don't dwell on them. I don't think about them all the time. Now, I will be honest, when I was younger, I did. But when I was younger, I didn't have resources. I didn't have people to help me, right? I didn't, you know, I mean, like, I knew my mind was fucked up, but nobody else knew that. And I would dwell on there were some things I dwelled on, especially during my teenage years, right? I'll be honest, one was killing my family. I dwelled on that for the longest time. I'd even planned. I mean, I went all the way to the planning phase, right? That's how dark, that's how deep I went. And I'll be honest, at this phase, I was only 10 years old, 10 or 11, so I wasn't quite old enough to really react on it. But I already knew my order. I knew, like, I had literally planned the kill order that I was gonna go, right? And I knew everything was. And the thing is that, like, when I was younger, I did dwell on my thoughts a lot more. My turning point was when I realized I had a choice to make. And this is something that's very important. If you're going through these thoughts, this is a choice you're going to have to make. Do you dwell on these thoughts and lead that lifestyle? Or do you focus on something more important? What's more important to you? For me, I had to choose between going down the path of a serial killer or having a family of my own. And I decided that I wanted a family of my own. And I knew that those paths were not compatible. Which is something that you have to remember yourself, is that usually the two things you know, something you really want is almost never going to be compatible with that path. So you have to make every step to get to that path. Now, for those of you who are not aware of this, I'm going to go into some of my own personal thoughts that I had in the past. And viewer discretion advised, it is pretty disturbed. Again, if this still affected me heavily now, I probably wouldn't talk about it. This is the past. I have learned how to control my own emotions, my own body, and my own thoughts to a much higher degree. And when these things do occur, I know how to handle it now to avoid any form of focus on it and to keep my life better. So, with that said, I already told you one was the murdering of my family, right? Now, to be fair, I was heavily bullied by my family. Like, they all bullied me pretty harshly, so it caused a lot of problems there. But, again, the past is the past. I've grown past it. I've forgiven pretty much all of them for it, but I don't have a relationship with most of them because of it. The next one would be, well, for me, an issue is with my current disability, it gets very sexual, right? Which is probably why a lot of serial killers who suffer from similar disabilities that I have usually get sexual pleasure out of it, because it's very sexual, right? So mine usually get sexual, so things where pretty much some pedophilic stuff. Technically, I wasn't an adult yet, but I was close enough, if that makes sense, and the age group was big enough, right? Some ancestral stuff. I mean, and of course some forced stuff, right? It was all pretty fucked up. But the thing is that, you know, back then I would focus on it a bit more. Well, some things, right? Not all those. Well, one of those was actually, technically, to be fair, the ancestral stuff was a dream that woke me up. That when I woke up, I was disgusted by it. I was like, that was actually not a thought. That was a dream. The reason that's never left me is because it happened once and it was freaking gross. And even back then, I thought it was gross. And that's the thing, right? Like, you can have these thoughts and just be like, dude, that's freaking gross. Why did that come into my head? And have no idea why it went in your head. I, to this day, do not know why that one popped in my head, because I was never down for that. And it was pretty freaking gross, to be honest. To be 100% honest. So I didn't really dwell on that one. It just has always confused me, but I haven't really, I don't focus on it. And that one is honestly okay, but it's like, luckily for me, like, I had no drive to even think about that in any other way other than it was freaking gross. But nonetheless, it occurred, and that's the point, that sometimes shit's gonna occur in your head that you do think is gross and have no idea why it popped there. The realistic fact is you don't have control over what your brain does. Your brain is popping on, so not different chemicals are hitting your brain, man. It's fucking that brain up, and it doesn't always work well. But as I got older, I moved from just sexual to more violent than sexual, right? So I think one of my biggest, right? I'm gonna go into one of my darkest time periods when I was in a mental hospital, right? I went to the military, I was mentally discharged. They really had no idea just how mentally insane I was at that point, which is funny because they thought I was lying with what I said. I was 100% sincere when I said that I was very close, and I was really debating killing one of the fellow soldiers there after he made some very lewd comments towards my 15-year-old sister, which, as an older brother, if any of you guys are older brothers, I don't consider that too insane. The problem is that I knew exactly how I was going to do it, and when I told the lead military doctor exactly what I was going to do, showing that I had actually planned it, they immediately got me out of that platoon and into a mental hospital. Funny thing about the military, they love to lie, right? The military, if there's one thing I'll tell you guys about the military, never trust the military. Now, that does not mean don't respect the soldiers. You should always respect soldiers, especially those who've seen combat. If the soldiers seen combat, been in the shit, they always deserve respect. What I'm talking about is the military branch itself. They lie about a lot of things. And that one, they lied a lot about mental hospital, telling me that only hospitals for the criminally insane were available, in which I knew that if I didn't go somewhere, right, I knew if I didn't get out of that environment, if I didn't get away from this person who I was thinking about killing nonstop, that I would eventually act on it. I knew I would, right? And this is something that you'll start to probably tell if you have these thoughts. You can start telling when you're getting close to acting on something. And that's definitely when, if you need to, you get yourself out of that situation as quick as possible. Funnily enough, when I told them just send me to a criminal insane hospital for the criminally insane, they found an empty room at a residential hospital which had multiple empty rooms. That hospital is absolute garbage, I'm gonna tell you guys. Like, that doctor who came in literally diagnosed everybody with bipolar disorder. I mean, everybody. I mean, like, people I met there, he said they were bipolar, they said I was bipolar. They put me on bipolar medication. Now, here's something really important to understand. If you suffer from mental illness, that's a chemical imbalance in the brain. Adding wrong chemicals to your brain makes you worse. So it's very important to understand before I go into my darkest thought, right? Because you gotta remember that I had a chemical imbalance in my brain, and then I had chemicals being put in my brain that my brain didn't need, pretty much making it worse. Okay? And so my thoughts realistically went into the realms of cannibalism, right? I fantasized about literally drinking people's blood. Not only that, right, but it affected me so much that I was actually suffering from stages of schizophrenia, where I actually started to believe that I was not a mythical vampire, if that makes sense, but a vampire, where I, was not human, right? And that's something that you gotta remember, is that my disability, borderline personality disorder, can sometimes trigger be triggered, especially around people with other disorders, can actually mimic them a bit. So that mixed with the wrong medication can trigger, forms of psychosis, forms of schizophrenia. Like, it can really make things bad for you, right? And so that was mine, right? The actual fantasizing, and it got bad when my body was physically reacting to these thoughts, right? These things. If I had actually been in public and not in a hospital, there is a chance I might have acted out on it, right? That's how bad it got. And to be fair, I was being given the wrong medication because the doctor was an idiot. If you've ever seen Rugrats, and like the Dr. Lipschitz episode where Stu and Stu's wife, I forgot her name, are talking to Dr. Lipschitz and he's just playing tic-tac-toe with himself. Literally, that's what this doctor was like. I mean, I don't even think this doctor spoke English, to be 100% honest. Like, not well, right? It was absolutely horrible. And when I got home, back to my house, my parents' house, they got me into an actual real psychiatrist who immediately got me off that medication. Looked at it, was like, what the hell are you doing with this medication? You are not bipolar. You get off. And I was immediately off it because when I got out of the hospital, I was so much more sick, it wasn't even funny. And the worst part about it was I was violent, right? I was actually dangerous because of wrong chemicals being shut in your brain. And this is something to remember. If you suffer from any form of chemical imbalance in your brain that is a mental illness, bipolar disorder, a borderline personality disorder, antisocial disorder, any form of these disorders, right? The last thing you need is more chemicals in your brain. So this is very important to all of you guys who suffer from a mental illness. Avoid substances. When I mean substances, I mean everything. Cigarettes, weed, alcohol, everything. Keep that shit out of your body. I would even avoid heavy caffeine if it affects you, if it has an effect on you. The reason why is the last thing you need in your brain are chemicals, and definitely alcohol, right? Alcohol is often ignored, but alcohol is nothing but causing an actual chemical imbalance in your brain. That's what makes you drunk, an actual chemical imbalance in your brain. You're literally you're poisoning yourself, affecting those chemicals in your brain, and as somebody who naturally has that, affecting those chemicals can be so much more dangerous than you imagine. It's something that it's a reason I don't drink often at all, right? Like, I will never be cured, right? You can't be cured from this. You can't be cured from a chemical imbalance in your brain. What you can do is learn how to handle it, how to live healthy, right? Which I will talk about at the end of this video. But the thing is that when you put chemicals in your brain, especially wrong medication, right? Or heavy drugs, right? This is the big one. Heavy drugs, weed, heroin, weed is not a drug, not weed. Heroin, cocaine, meth. If you put any of that shit into your body, you are literally giving yourself a death wish, right? Which leads us to a very important topic. Whenever some type of psychopath gets caught, it's always as though he did it because he was mentally ill. And this is something that is really bad mentality. The reason why is it makes those who are mentally ill kind of think that they have no hope. I thought like that. I was like, well, shit, I'm fucking crazy as fuck. I'm gonna be just like them. And what ends up happening is this destroys not only the people who suffer from it, but also makes the people who don't suffer from it terrified of these people, so they don't actually, instead of avoiding creating more of these psychos, you create more psychos because they get ostracized, ignored, or they have to hide who they are, which just tears them aside, tears them up inside, right? Instead of people being like, look, you are firing on different cylinders, we get it, let's find out what we can do. You tell somebody you have thoughts that are bad, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're disgusting, you're a psycho. And let's be very clear, right? Very clear, very important. There is a major difference between somebody who has thoughts and somebody who acts on those thoughts, right? Anybody in the world can have a thought that is technically illegal, bad, but when they act on that thought, regardless of what it is, that's when they've gone and they've crossed that line. So if you are suffering from these thoughts, as long as you do not act on these thoughts, you have not crossed that line yet. But you have to, again, be cautious, because the closer you get to the line, the more blurred the wall between fantasy and reality becomes, and eventually you're going to cross it. You are more likely to cross that wall than somebody who is poor in the ghetto is to rob a liquor store. Because the person who is poor and in the ghetto robbing a liquor store, they haven't broken that wall between imaginary and reality. They're probably just it's a necessity situation, right? It's survival. But for us, it's not survival. It's enjoyment, and it's ecstasy, and it's something that you want to avoid. Now, this is very important, right? Every single psychopath who is a serial killer, who's committed a crime, it's very important to understand that they are 100% responsible. None of them, not one, is innocent, or better yet, guilt-free. The reason why is because at some point in their life, they decided to dwell, fantasize, sexually release, plan, then act on it. They had many opportunities to turn back, many opportunities to check themselves in, many opportunities to just say, I don't want this life, I'm going to find another way. But the reality of it is, they didn't. And so, very important to understand. Serial killers, I think, are often, to be honest, shown with as a kind of a positive light. I mean, they're shown as these strong predators, right? And to be perfectly honest, serial killers are not strong. Predators who hunt are not strong, right? You can be a predator, but I think you're a lot stronger if you don't hunt. You might be saying, what do you mean by hunt? Don't. Here's what I mean by it, right? If you have thoughts, peddling thoughts, right, you are a predator. But if you then act on those thoughts, you are a predator that is hunting. If you do not act on those thoughts, you're not hunting. And that's the big thing. Are you a hunter or not a hunter? And in these cases, I'm going to be honest, being a hunter is giving into your most, animal instincts, right? Showing you are that weak. All serial killers, regardless of how intelligent they may have been, you look at Ted Bundy as one of the most intelligent and well-spoken serial killers, the fact are, they are all weak. All serial killers, all psychopaths who act on their fantasies are weak. And you need to remember that. If you're going through this struggle, if you act, if you dwell, if you go down that path, you are too weak. You've decided that you're too weak to actually overcome it, to handle it, to be a person who can live with what they deal with and succeed. You will never succeed as long as you dwell on those thoughts, as long as you go down that path. And one thing to remember is 9 times out of 10, or 9.9 out of 10, they always get caught because they become cocky and arrogant and too sure of themselves. And the fact is, they're just absolutely weak. So, we're at the end of the video. I hope if you've had any of these thoughts, I hope knowing that other people have them does help. But let's end this video with how you, suffering from mental illness, can take care of yourself and hopefully someday live medication-free and healthy. And that's the most important, right? Medication-free and healthy. Now, very important, most doctors are not going to tell you to get off the medication. Not because you can't, but most likely because the risk is going to outweigh the reward, right? They don't know because realistically, working as a psychiatrist, it's a real fine science. You don't know whether or not somebody is honestly recovered or lying, right? But if you wish to end up in that form of path someday being able to live medication-free and happy, these are the things you have to do. Step 1. Constantly change your way of thinking. Do not dwell on thoughts that are dark, disturbing, and this means to avoid music which will bring those thoughts into your head. Every time you do that, you risk yourself diving deeper. Avoid music that will bring it, avoid anything that triggers it. You should not watch any movies that are going to trigger them. I personally would suggest that anybody who suffers from any form of personality disorder to avoid any form of torture movies such as Saw. Avoid any form of movie with rape. Because the fact is, this is going to trigger you, and you might be watching some type of movie that most people are like, oh, that's so aggressive, like, it's kind of got me aroused, right? And the problem with that is that you are now being aroused by something you shouldn't be. So, number one, media. Control your media. If something is actually bringing more thoughts that are disturbing and dark, remove that from your life. This is why I have never seen a Saw movie, nor will I ever see a Saw movie, even though I do think the plots are very interesting. This doesn't mean I don't read the plots. I do read the plots, but there's a difference between reading a plot and watching this happen on life, right? So, I avoid all gory movies. Now, I will be honest, I don't avoid all gory games, but it's a lot easier for me to keep that wall between fantasy and reality because if it's a game, for me a game is a game, I do it to escape reality. And because I do it to escape reality, I know it's not fantasy. I know it's not reality, right? So I'm not actually going to be personally affected by that. But if you are, you should avoid those kinds of games as well. Eating. Let's talk about dietary, right? Like I said before, avoid anything that changes the chemicals in your brain. This definitely includes alcohol, weed, cigarettes, and all heavy drugs. Do not use any of these while you are still suffering from any form of your disability. Once you get to a point, you might be able to control it as long as you're in a lot of control. I have a cocktail maybe once or twice a month. That's about it. And that's usually only when my neighbor gives me one. I don't do it on my own unless I've had a very stressful day. But because it's a stressful day, it's already a different way. Anyways, to be fair, weed never affected me in any form of violent way. It actually did calm me down. So weed might be a calm down, but I would still advise it just because the fact is, self-medicating is not the way to handle it, especially if you self-medicate the wrong way. You're going to trigger those chemicals and you're going to end up doing something that you will probably regret. Food. Eat healthy, right? The unhealthier we eat, the more negative chemicals in our brain and our body, the worse we feel, and the more likely you are to fall trapped to these thoughts we have. So eat healthy, salads, right? Cut out the sugars. Eat healthy, eat the salads, take care of yourself, exercise if you like to. I hate exercising, I don't. But do try to eat healthy, right? Take care of your body. And I think the final one, right? Find someone, a psychiatrist, a close friend, to talk to get your feelings out. The worst thing to do is to hold in your feelings and just be like, oh, I can handle this, I can handle this, I can do it on my own. The fact is, you probably can't do it on your own. Some of these things are just to be honest, too hard. You have to actually rely on somebody to help you succeed in this. And until you're to a point where you are strong enough to do it on your own, finding somebody, a psychiatrist, a close friend, somebody who you can trust in is important. Music. Control your music. Don't listen to anything that's going to lead you into those thoughts. And most importantly, do not idolize serial killers. That was one of my biggest mistakes when I was younger, is I always idolized serial killers. I looked at, Hannibal Lecter, right? He's not even a real serial killer, right? And I think Hannibal Lecter is a horrible excuse for a serial killer, because the fact is, they portrayed him in a very strong, positive way, right? Like, you look at Hannibal Lecter, he's portrayed as this really strong, intelligent killer, but the fact is, he fell victim to his most animalistic traits. That is not strong, that is weak, right? So I highly advise avoiding anything that glorifies the serial killers or murder. It's very important. And with that said, guys, we're going to cut the video here. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below. Again, I am fine, right? I have no interest in doing any forms of harm to myself or another. I'm perfectly good. The only point I want to make with people is that it's very important that we make this discussion so that people have a place to go to talk when they are suffering from this, so that they're actually able to, you know, handle this without any serious problems. I would advise, if you are not somebody who suffers from these types of thoughts or whatnot, do not immediately get turned away from somebody like this. But I would also suggest not being alone with this person, not because there is, you know, inherently something wrong with them, but mostly because you don't actually know, right? And that's the big thing, and anybody who's suffering from this will probably agree. It's better to not, because you don't know, and you know, like, better safe than sorry, right? So with that said, guys, I'm gonna be ending it here. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you guys next week with the next video. Peace.